Hillbilly music. Quote, "This is the sacred mystery of democracy," intoned Woodrow Wilson, dedicating the log cabin where Abraham Lincoln was born, in words ponderous enough to suit the mayor of Tupelo, Mississippi, when he dedicated the birthplace of Elvis Presley. That its richest fruits spring up out of soils which no man had prepared, and circumstances amidst which they are least expected. I like those words. The question of history may have been settled on the side of process, not personality, but it is not a settlement I much appreciate. Historical forces might explain the Civil War, but they don't account for Lincoln. They might tell us why rock and roll emerged when it did, but they don't explain Elvis any more than they explain Little Peggy March. What a sense of context does give us when we are looking for someone in particular is an idea of what that person had to work with. But for myself, it always seems inexplicable in the end anyway. There are always blank spots, and that is where the myths take over. Elvis's story is so classically American, poor country boy makes good in the city, that his press agents never bothered to improve on it. But it is finely elusive too, just like all the good stories. It surrounds its subject without quite revealing it. But it resonates, it evokes like crazy. Now the critical and least tangible point in the biography of any great man or woman is just that place where that person's story begins to detach itself from those of countless others like it. Take Lincoln again. Was it that famous hike when he brought the borrowed book back? The moment on the stand facing Douglas when he knew he had him licked and loved it? The day he was born? You can't answer such questions, not computer style, but you have no claim on the story unless you risk a guess. They called Elvis the hillbilly cat in the beginning. He came out of a stepchild culture in the South, white trash, to the rest of America, a caricature of Bilbo and moonshine, that for all it shared with the rest of America had its own shape and integrity. As a poor white Southern boy, Elvis created a personal culture out of the hillbilly world that was his as a given. Ultimately, he made that personal culture public in such an explosive way that he transformed not only his own culture, but America's. It was as Southern Chambers of Commerce have never tired of saying, a land of contrasts. The fundamental contrast, of course, could not have been more obvious, black and white. Always at the root of Southern fantasy, Southern music, and Southern politics, Black Americans were poised in the early 50s for an overdue invasion of American life in fantasy, music, and politics. As the North scurried to deal with the problem, the South would be pushed farther and farther into the weirdness and madness its best artists had been trying to exorcise from the time of Poe on down. Its politics would dissolve into night riding and hysteria. Its fantasies would be dull for all their gaudy paranoia. Only the music got away clean. The North, powered by the Protestant ethic, had set men free by making them strangers. The poor man's South that Elvis knew took strength from community. The community was based on a marginal economy that demanded cooperation, loyalty, and obedience for the achievement of anything resembling a good life. It was organized by religion, morals, and music. Music helped hold the community together and carried the traditions and shared values that dramatized a sense of place. Music gave pleasure, wisdom, and shelter. Quote, "It's the only place in the country I've ever been where you can actually drive down the highway at night, and if you listen, you hear music," end of quote, Robbie Robertson once said. Quote, "I don't know if it's coming from the people or if it's coming from the air. It lives and it's rooted there," end of quote. Elegant enough, but I prefer another comment Robbie made. Quote, "The South," he said, "is the only place we play where everybody can clap on the offbeat," end of quote. Music was also an escape from the community, and music revealed its underside. There were always people who could not join no matter how they might want to. Tramps, whores, rounders, idiots, criminals. The most vital were singers. not the neighbors who brought out their fiddles and guitars for country picnics, as Elvis used to do, or those who sang in church, as he did also, but the professionals. They were men who bridged the gap between the community's sentimentalized idea of itself and the outside world and the forbidden. Artists who could take the community beyond itself because they had the talent and the nerve to transcend it. Often doomed, traveling through the South, enjoying sins and freedoms the community had surrendered out of necessity or never known at all, they were too ambitious, ornery, or simply different to fit in. The Carter family in the 20s were the first to record the old songs everyone knew to make the shared musical culture concrete, and their music drew a circle around the community. They celebrated the landscape, especially the Clinch Mountains that ring to their home, and found strength in a feel for death because it was the only certainty. Laughed a bit, promised to leave the hillbilly home they helped build only on a gospel ship. Jimmie Rodgers, their contemporary, simply hopped a train. He was every boy who ever ran away from home, hanging out in the railroad yards, bumming around with black minstrels, pushing out the limits of his life. He celebrated long, tall mamas that rubbed his back and licked his neck just to cure the cough that killed him. He bragged about gunplay on Beale Street. He sang real blues, played jazz with Louis Armstrong. And though there was melancholy in his soul, his smile was a good one. He sounded like a man who could make a home for himself anywhere. There's so much room in this country, he seemed to be saying. So many things to do. How could an honest man be satisfied to live within the frontiers he was born to? Outside of the community, because of the way they lived, the singers were tied to it as symbols of its secret hopes, of its fantasies of escape and union with the black man, of its fears of transgressing the moral and social limits that promised peace of mind. Singers could present the extremes of emotion, risk, pleasure, sex, and violence that the community was meant to control. They were often alcoholic or worse, lacking a real family, drifters in a world where roots were life. Sometimes the singer tantalized the community with his outlaw liberty. Dying young, he finally justified the community by his inability to survive outside of it. More often than not, the singer's resistance dissolved into sentiment. Reconversion is the central country music comeback strategy, and many have returned to the fold after a brief fling with the devil, singing songs of virtue, fidelity, and God, as if to prove that sin only hid a deeper piety, or that there was no way out. By the late 40s and early 50s, Hank Williams had inherited Jimmie Rodgers' role as the central figure in the music, but he added an enormous reservation. That margin of loneliness in Rodgers' America had grown into a world of utter tragedy. Williams sang for a community to which he could not belong. He sang to a God in whom he could not quite believe. Even his many songs of good times and good lovin' seemed to lose their reality. There were plenty of jokes in his repertoire, novelties like Caw Liga, the tale of unrequited love between two cigar store Indians. He traveled Rodgers' road. But for Williams, that road was a lost highway. Beneath the surface of his forced smiles and his light, easy sound, Hank Williams was kin to Robert Johnson in a way that the new black singers of his day were not. Their music, coming out of New Orleans, out of Sam Phillips' Memphis studio and washing down from Chicago, was loud, fiercely electric, raucous, bleeding with lust and menace and loss. The rhythmic force that was the practical legacy of Robert Johnson had evolved into a music that overwhelmed his reservations. The rough spirit of the new blues city R&B rolled right over his nihilism. Its message was clear. What life doesn't give me, I'll take. Hank Williams was a poet of limits, fear, and failure. He went as deeply into one dimension of the country world as anyone could, gave it beauty, gave it dignity. What was missing was that part of the hillbilly soul Rodgers had celebrated, something Williams's music obscured, but which his realism could not express and the community's moralism could not contain: excitement, rage, fantasy, delight. The feeling summed up in a sentence by W.J. Cash from The Mind of the South, that, quote, even the southern physical world was a kind of cosmic conspiracy against reality in favor of romance, end of quote. That even if Elvis's South was filled with Puritans, it was also filled with natural-born hedonists, and the same people were both.